Good morning, everyone. I think everyone's in. So I think we'll get started. Before I hand you over to this team of folks to give you this presentation, a couple little housekeeping pieces. Cell phones, let's mute them, please, if you don't mind. Also, if you have not downloaded the MarkLogic World app, I suggest you do so, and we'd really appreciate it at the end of the session if you would fill out the survey. We'll even give you access to $10 donation to your local charity if you do fill it out, or we can register you for a $250 gift card. So a little incentive there to fill out a survey. Don't worry too much about taking notes. We're recording these sessions, and we'll send a link out to all of you at the end of this month to where it is. And we're going to have about 10 minutes of questions, we're hoping, at the end. So if we could kind of hold off questions to the end, that would be great. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Enrique, who will introduce this crew.
So yes, I get that honor today. Good morning, everybody. My name is Enrique Alonso. Can you hear me? Hello. There you go. My name is Enrique, and I manage technology alliances globally for MarkLogic. And I'm delighted to introduce this session titled Esri and MarkLogic, Building a Geospatial Data Hub. Here with us is Tim Murphy with Esri, James Kerr with MarkLogic, and they'll introduce themselves in terms of what they do a little bit later, and Tom Dippenbrock from MarkLogic as well. And if you think about this problem, organizations both in the commercial side of things and government organizations increasingly need to combine location data they have with other critical data assets that they use to drive really important critical business insight. Esri is a strategic global partner for MarkLogic. This session will show how MarkLogic integrates with Esri to create really what you can consider enable a new generation of location analytics capability. So the way we're going to go about it is Tim will first give you an overview of Esri, for those of you who are not as familiar with Esri. And then James will dive deep into some description of how we integrate MarkLogic with Esri, followed by some joint demonstrations, which are really, really interesting. And then we'll close it out with a real-world example of something we've done with a customer, and that's something that Tom Dippenbrock will do. So, guys, just take it from there.
Excellent. Okay, can you hear me? Well, I can hear myself, so I presume you guys can hear me too. Perfect. So, hi, my name is Tim Murphy. I am with Esri, or ESRI, or Environmental Systems Research Institute, if I've got that right. I think I do. So we've got a couple other people from Esri here also. Randall Billy hiding over here, and Frank Martin up front. If you guys want to stand up for a second and do a queen-like wave, that would be great. We have, because we like to live dangerously, we have some very powerful live demonstrations that we're going to be showing you. I am very quickly going to hit some of the high points for some of the framework for the ArcGIS platform and for Esri as a whole, so that we can make more time for the live demonstrations. If you have any questions about Esri, please grab one of the three of us or any of the other secret Esri people that are hiding about. We are everywhere. All right, and here we go. As I wait for this to catch up, give me one sec. You're on the wrong one. Go ahead. Sweet, thank you. And it's working. All right, demo's over. Thank you very much. So, Esri. So, if you are not familiar with us, we are primarily focused on geospatial information or geographic information systems. Essentially, if you don't know what GIS is, you don't know what Esri is, don't worry, you're still in the right meeting, because what we do is we help you understand what it means to understand where things are and how that affects you. And again, we've got a couple of core tenets that you see on the left-hand side. We follow those core tenets very, very seriously, and it has helped us to be a pretty successful organization across the planet in federal as well as commercial spaces. ArcGIS, this is the technology platform that everything else you're going to see today is built off of. And you're going to see that for ArcGIS Pro, that's going to be our desktop application. You're going to see it for Enterprise. You're going to see it across the board. And we use ArcGIS across a variety of different technologies, as well as a variety of different users and roles and different types of workflows. So we have a very passionate and loud and driven user groups and customers. And some would call them rabid, and I love them. They are absolutely fantastic. But at the same time, for all those geospatial analysts that are using us, we're also getting used by C-suites, by executives, by decision makers. So you've got folks who know geospatial way better than I do. But then you've also got users who, they can't program the GPS in their car. They don't know the raster from their vector. But at the same time, they know how to bring up a dashboard and to be able to understand that geospatial information and how it's going to affect the decisions that they're about to make. And that's really what we're about. So we, for the developers in the room and the geeks like me, we are a very open platform for not only bringing data into the system, but also for being able to export data out. Whole variety of other things that we can be talking about, and we're going to be demonstrating some of these capabilities here next. So with what you've seen so far, our pattern for how we approach these problems, we need to be able to connect to the data. It doesn't mean we have to ingest the data, but we have to be able to reach it and touch it and be able to get to the data somehow. Once we can do that, then we can analyze that information, we can display the results, make interactive visualizations, and kind of just as importantly or more importantly, help you who've built that visualization or that conclusion tell that story and help drive consensus within your organization or your department. Two of the examples of doing exactly that we're going to be highlighting within our demonstrations. One, what do you do when you've got too much signal? So that top left, that's 48 hours of cell phone traffic outside of Washington, D.C. And if I were to say, somewhere in there is your insider threat person, is your arsonist, is your terrorist, is your whoever, I assure you on their caller ID, it does not just say terrorist. So we need to be able to bring the context into the picture. We need to bring the rest of the story in. So for any one of those points on the map, how is it connected, geospatially or non-geospatially, to everything else in the world around it so that we can help go through that haystack? Second thing we're going to be talking about, unstructured. So unstructured routinely is capturing both geospatial information as well as entities, things, person, place, object, etc. So how do we, ArcGIS and Esri, how do we work with unstructured, and not just for being able to get that geospatial and connect to it, but work with it at scale? We say that unstructured is accessible to us. Well, 1 million documents are sitting right there and the answer's in there. And in the time that it took for me to start this presentation to here, another 1 million documents have just shown up. So how do we go through that information? So you can kind of guess what my answer is for how we go through that information given the conference that we're at. So when you take best of breed geospatial capability and you add it into best of breed multimodal with also advanced geospatial functionality themselves, and you bring these two technology stacks together, what do you end up getting? You end up getting location analytics for everything. And with that, I'm going to be handing this over to James.
Great, thanks, Tim. So I'm going to dive down into really how MarkLogic and Esri are working together these days. So in order to enable the types of applications that Tim is talking about, we need to leverage the multi-model data integration capabilities of the MarkLogic Data Hub. So using the Data Hub, we can quickly and easily integrate data from lots of different sources, all the sources that Tim was just talking about, right? We can ingest that into the Data Hub. And then what we need to be able to do, though, is serve that content out to the end users, to the analysts. Using the MarkLogic Esri connector, we can expose out that data via feature services. Feature services are an Esri-specific API that they use to allow their tools to exchange information. So using the feature services, sitting on top of the Data Hub, we can expose all of the data in the Data Hub out to the to the Esri tools for the analysts. So let's look in a little bit more detail of how that actually works under the covers. So as you'll see, as I delve into this, really the key to making this all work is a set of capabilities that were added in MarkLogic 9. And that's the Optic API and Template-Driven Extraction, or TDE. So TDE allows us to use templates to create what we call lenses on top of our data, right? So we can project out row-based or SQL-based views across the data, or Sparkle-based views over the data. And we can use the Optic API, which is a single integrated platform for querying across all those different shapes of data. So that allows us to sort of combine the strengths of all the different querying mechanisms, whether that's the search index that has been core to MarkLogic since the beginning, combining that with queries against the row index and the triple index using Sparkle. We can combine that all together in one query platform, and that's the Optic API. So if we delve down into what the data looks like, sort of conceptually, we start off with our documents that have geospatial data that's stored in the universal index. That data can then be used, we can use TDE to map that data into rows in the row index. We can use TDEs to map that data into the triple index. And then, of course, the geospatial data is encoded into the geospatial index. We can use the Optic API to join all that data together and expose that out as layers which contain features. So conceptually, a layer is a layer on a map, and that layer is exposed via feature service, and all of the features that you see as points on the map or polygons on the map are mapped back to the documents that they came from inside of the MarkLogic database. So let's talk about the architecture of the connector. The connector is really made up of 3 components. The back-end component is what we call the geodata services. The geodata services is really the heart of the connector that exposes the query API, which is like the real, the core. It does the bulk of the work. It also has a couple of services for managing the services and metadata about those services. The geodata services, is built on top of the Optic API and TDE that I've already talked about. The second component is the MarkLogic Coop provider. And the MarkLogic Coop provider is a plugin to a platform called Coop. Coop is a Node.js Express framework that is an open source project that Esri maintains. And the Coop provider allows us to leverage the logic within the Coop framework that maps the GeoJSON data that comes out of geodata services into Esri JSON. So all the Esri tools consume Esri JSON specific formatting that the feature service exposes. And that's what we use the Coop provider for. And the third part of this is ArcGIS Pro add-in, which you're going to see in the demonstrations. That's a native connector or native add-in that runs in the ArcGIS Pro desktop application. It's Esri's flagship desktop app. And that allows us to give users a search experience against their data stored in MarkLogic, but in the ArcGIS Pro platform. All of that is tied together using these things called service descriptors. So service descriptors allow us to define what feature services are exposed via the Esri connector. It allows us to configure the layers, information about what are the geographic extents of the layers, what are the different data sources that we have for data that's going to be exposed in those layers. We can set up a bounding query, which I'm going to show and talk more about in the demonstration. We can also configure what geospatial indexes will be used when we run queries against those services. And fundamentally, it's a declarative way for us to create Optic API queries that can be executed by the connector, right? So we don't have to write code in order to create new queries that the Optic API runs. We can do this declaratively through these service descriptors. So let's delve into sort of what the connector uses and runs under the covers. Fundamentally, the Optic API uses these things called query plans. So when you build up a query for Optic API, it's called a plan. It can be also thought of as a pipeline, right? So multiple stages, and each stage leads into the other one. So the start of the pipeline is really the data sources. We can pull in multiple views, whether those are row-based views or Sparkle-based views, and we can join that data together within one pipeline. We can limit what documents we want to include in the query, and that's when I talked about the bounding query for the layer. This is where that would be applied. We can have an optic where expression, and the Esri feature services use SQL to define or to allow users to specify like what rows or what features they want to come back. We can convert that SQL into Optic API where expressions. And then we have some stages that allow you to tell the API what you want to order by and offset and limit, so you can do pagination. You can join information from the document into the final result. You can transform it into the GeoJSON that comes out via the GeoData services. The Esri feature service also allows you to do aggregations. The aggregation pipeline looks pretty much the same, except for we now have a group by stage in the pipeline that allows us to do aggregate calculations as specified by the client. And what comes out of that is this sort of statistics JSON that the feature service can return. So in summary, the Esri connector allows us to expose the power of full text indexing, geospatial indexing, and row-based indexing all via one interface. It's configuration based, meaning you don't have to write code to expose your data that is already sitting in your MarkLogic database to the Esri tools. And it implements a standard interface, so really all of the Esri tools should be able to consume the data. And last, try it out. It's an open source project. It's out on GitHub. And the ArcGIS Pro add-in, we're working on getting that onto the marketplace as soon as possible. But if you want to try it out, definitely come talk to us afterwards. So with that, I'm going to turn it over into demo land. We're going to cross our fingers that everything works right. So to set the stage a little bit, in the demos, Tim and I will be acting as sort of analysts, intelligence analysts that are collaborating together. We have our tools that we're working with, and we're working using Esri tools against a MarkLogic Data Hub that has been populated with a bunch of situation reports as well as some data from the Global Terrorism Database. And we are going to work against that data and collaborate through the Esri tools. And so one of the sources of information I said is this situation reports. Situation reports, we're reading them from a file share and running them through a process where we are running them through a tool called NetOwl to do entity extraction, identify places and things, and load those into the database and be able to visualize them in the Esri tools. So with that, let me switch over to ArcGIS Pro. Okay, so this is ArcGIS Pro, and in Pro I have an add-in, and this is the MarkLogic add-in. We can basically select the search tool or the search results. I already have those displayed here. So within the search tool, I can connect up to a server. I've already authenticated prior to the demo, but if I hadn't authenticated, it would have asked for my credentials, and so I would only be querying and seeing the data that I can see as a particular user. I can select the feature service that I want, and have it load that feature service into Pro. That loaded up this place mentions feature service, and I have 4 layers that I'm working with here. And Tim and I are collaborating on this one layer called Ops Center. I can select the search configuration that I want to use. It's the reports configuration, and I can do search. In this case, I'm going to search for nuclear. So in this, I see if you're used to working with MarkLogic and MarkLogic search interfaces, this should look very familiar to you, right? We have a faceted navigation here on the left side that shows us, counts for each of the types of weapons, vehicles, and organizations. And these are all things that were identified via NetOwl. And then I see on the map, I see the points of the places that are mentioned within those reports. And then I see a search results pane that allows me to actually see the documents that have come back. And when I select that document, it shows what places were mentioned inside of that document. So we have a full text, a query-based user interface, or user experience rather, right within ArcGIS Pro. So for this, in this scenario, we're gonna zoom into Iraq. And as you see, when I zoomed into Iraq, my search results changed because the add-in is actually bounding my query by the viewport that I'm looking at. So as you can see, my results change, and the number of points change based on the view that I have. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more to the area that we're collaborating on together. And once again, you can see the results change. So you can think of the map as like a geospatial facet, right? It's showing all of the points that are in the documents that are coming back. So as I zoom into that, and then let me clear this here, and we're working on actual IEDs in this area, so I'm going to search for reports that mention improvised explosive devices. I'm going to save this, and what this does is sets a bounding query for this feature service, right? So this Ops Center layer, when I hit save, that converts or sets up the Ops Center layer to only show points and documents from documents that match my bounding query. So if you remember in that pipeline that I showed, there was a CTS where query that was at the beginning of the pipeline. And this is a really powerful concept. It allows us to filter down a large set of data that we're working with and filter it down into the area of interest and the data that we want to work with. And at that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim, because he's going to start using that layer in some of the other tools.
Thank you, James. Okay, we good on the mic? Perfect. Excellent. So James has already done his work. Welcome to ArcGIS Enterprise, and we're going to talk about some of the web distribution. By the way, for the gentleman in the back, if you'd like, there are 5 seats up front on the front row. So, ArcGIS Enterprise. Straight off the top, we're using this to be able to store geospatial information, to be able to keep track of what information we have where. So as we're looking through this, I can see living atlas layers that are published that I can work off of. I can be looking at my content individually, or I can, more importantly for what we're talking about here, I can also go to the organization's content. So this is information that's been published up and made accessible by the organization. And as we're going through this, one of the layers that you see, the situation reports that James has just created. And it looks just like this. Now, this is something that we can take and put into a map, and one of the things I wanted to be able to show was what it takes to put a MarkLogic layer that's being provided into ArcGIS. It is an elaborate process that involves the paste keyboard function. And there you go. So as I zoom out a little bit so you can see it, that feature service did not need to be all that content did not need to be ingested by ArcGIS. We were able to connect to MarkLogic using open standard interfaces to be able to connect to the live streaming data and be able to bring that in. So I've used this for a couple of other things, and I've made another base map that's combining both statistical information for violence within the region being provided by MarkLogic, as well as the layer that James has just made with the unstructured information at the same time. So I could be doing all of my analysis right here, right now within the browser. What I really want to do is create something so I can hand it off to consumers and let them do some spatial exploration and interactive analysis. So this is where we have something that we call an operations dashboard. There are lots of ways to be able to create these operations dashboards for lots of different problems. So for what you're seeing here, this is against a very similar data set. And what I'm going to do before we leave here, just like you are now certified in how to bring in data from a feature service being provided by MarkLogic, I'm also going to show all of you how to create a dashboard. Lots of ways to be able to do it. One other thing that I'd like to kind of point out, so this is all drag and drop built, no code needed. If we want to start getting into the APIs and the code, we've got a lot more functionality that we can also bring to bear here. This is, for instance, some live Waze data against 3D models within New York, or one of my favorites, 3D model of New York with crime being played over space and time. And of course, just to make it cool, with the whole 3D interactivity of it. So we want to be able to do these types of things so that every person can go and do this, not just coders, not just geospatial analysts. So we're going to go to something called Operations Dashboard, and we're going to create a new dashboard. And like most things, we're going to start with a map. Okay, we're on our way. So I've got a map, and I've got that statistical information in there. I've got some past historic heat map information in there, and those red diamonds indicate the live stream for everything unstructured from our ops center. So as I'm going through this, what I'd really like to be able to do is have some level of interactivity with some of that statistical information that's in there. So let's make a pie chart, and I'm going to point it at that layer, the Iraq violence layer. And I want to work on, I want to see who the targets are. And I want to be able to do some quick customizations. I don't want labels on it. I'll put the legend at the bottom. And I want some interactivity. So for an action, anytime you click on it, I want you to filter the map. And done. So now as I'm looking at this information and I click on the map, we get the live filtering that we're looking for. And that's pretty cool in and of itself, but I also want to do the inverse of this while I'm at it. And I'm going to configure the map so that whenever somebody moves the map, we also filter the pie chart. So now as we zoom in and we look around to different places on the map, it's also dynamically changing up the pie chart. When I go back to the pie chart, I can also still filter out everything else on the map. So we get this very nice sort of iterative circle for functionality. Now, one other thing that I kind of want to hit on here, because somebody somewhere is certainly saying, okay, that's fantastic, but two things. One, does it come in black? Yes. Because if it doesn't, it's not cool. And then the second one is, for live data that's coming in right now, do you have to go and rebuild this? Well, let's find out. Unstructured text document going into an Azure store, which is connected to MarkLogic. I hit paste, come back to here. So what should be going on in the background right now is that, and there it is. So that, before I could explain it, the document goes up to Azure. The document gets moved over to MarkLogic. It gets run through the enricher of NetL. It gets made accessible to ArcGIS, which is being published to the feature services, which is pushed back out to our ops dashboard. So not only because I'm incredibly happy that worked, I would love for everybody to take just 1 second and think about the amount of unstructured information that is coming at you every second. So it's not just the reports that are showing up on the shared drive. It's not just the chat log within Teams. But then we also get into things like email. We start getting into social media. And now we have an opportunity to be able to have anybody using any ArcGIS system whatsoever can have a live stream of unstructured awareness for the keywords, the entities, and the locations that they care about being pushed in as a configurable layer. So that's one part that we want to talk about. There's one other. So the classic problem of too much signal. So this is one of our partners that's providing live flight stream data for everything you see. So this is, no kidding, everything going over top of us right now. On top of it, we've added in 2 aircraft that are on loop so we can kind of pick on a target. So if you kind of sort of blur your eyes a little bit and take a look at this, you're going to say, hey, I've got data that looks like that, but it's maritime, or it's cargo, or it's phone calls, or it's something else. The approach that we're taking between MarkLogic and Esri is agnostic to the data that we are going against. It's a pattern, it's an approach, more so than being specific to just aircraft. So right now, if I were to say to you, go find the thing on the map, in this case a plane, that is registered to a shell company, that is masking the activity of another company that we know is on a watch list somewhere else. Well, some of the SQL folks will be like, oh, sure, I'm just going to do an inner join, and then I'm going to do this, and some of this other stuff. Okay, now do it at scale for all the data that's coming in. And now maybe it's not 2 hops, maybe it's 3. So this is where it gets very complicated, except we've got a pretty good answer for this. So imagine if somewhere right now, unrelated to anybody who knows anything about GIS, you have an analyst who is creating a link. You might be in a link chart, but they're essentially driving connections of things. So I'm going to start typing in that I've read something about a company called Aerospace Industries Organization, which happens to be an entity on the Treasury watch list. And it is connected to some other company on another watch list. And I'm going to create this as a semantic assertion. And as we look at this information, you can kind of see the path. So we're going from the watch list to an organization. That organization has a financial connection to another organization. That organization has ownership of an object that's on the map. So that's that semantic context that we want to be able to add in and bring to bear. And there it is. While all of this live flight streaming information has been coming into ArcGIS, we have been using MarkLogic for feature enrichment for being able to go out and say, is there anything within what I'm working on that I need to be worried about? And MarkLogic's on the back side with, as you can see, hopefully on the bottom left there, yes. Here's something that you need to care about. This aircraft owned by this company, is sitting on the following watch list. And again, this is the type of thing where we're doing it with aircraft. We could just as easily be doing it with boats, cargo, or anything else whatsoever. Last thing, and this is really just a quick shout out that I also want to be able to show. If you have not seen ICAP, Intelligence Configuration for ArcGIS Pro, this is one of the ways that we streamline things like ArcGIS Pro to add in functionality for people who are working purpose-built missions. Please come grab one of us and talk to us about it. Some of the functionality that you see here, so these are link charts that are being driven directly off of the MarkLogic capability so that we can show some of the interactivity between the link chart on the right-hand side and the map capability on the left. So please come up and talk to us about it. And with that, over to Tom.
I need the clicker to be able to do this.
I apologize. Please trust us with all of the other things. PowerPoint, just tricky. Cool.
All right. So I wanted to go through an example of a real system that we have built. This is for one of our customers. I can't tell you exactly the customer, but I can tell you that this is a real system. And what they are doing is creating, managing observations against incoming data. They are going to use this data later on for analysis, search, discovery, so that they can make certain judgments about what's going on in the world. This was originally a graph-based system. They based all of this data on a very complex but also very well-defined ontology, which helped us out a lot, actually, in what I'm going to describe to you. There were about 600 object classes, and what I mean by an object class is real things in the real world. So vehicles. What is a vehicle? What does that mean? Aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft, rotary wing aircraft, manned fixed-wing aircraft, unmanned fixed-wing aircraft. You guys get the idea of what they're talking about. In addition, we had a lot of classes that were about metadata around these objects. When did I see this object, and so forth. There are also custom classes that they built for specific missions so that they could accomplish certain things that not everybody needed to do. To give you some kind of idea of scale, the system, last time I checked, and this was a few months ago, they had about 850 million triples in this thing. They're probably pushing 1 billion right now. At the time, those triples were distributed over about 13 million or so JSON LD documents. We were originally brought in to help them with search. This graph store that they were using was terrific at answering the graphish kinds of questions that they were asking, and it was absolutely terrible at answering free text search. So we were brought in to handle that piece and those kinds of queries. And we did that over the JSON LD serialization of this semantic data. So they were ingesting this JSON LD document format, and at the time we took the opportunity to also convert those JSON LD documents into triples. It was a good thing we did that because that enabled us to do what I'm going to tell you about next. But at first, they were doing just plain MarkLogic bread and butter queries, text queries, geospatial queries, temporal queries. And they did all this, incidentally, using the MarkLogic Java Client API. I'm in the consulting division of MarkLogic, and we were not under contract at first to help them with this. These guys just sat down with the Java Client API and started working and got 50, 75% of the way there without any help whatsoever. Their next pain point that they ran into was integrating with Esri. And they had developed an Esri infrastructure that was based on a relational database backend, like most people do. And what that involved was taking all of this complex three-dimensional semantic data, and they had to run it through this horrific ETL process that was very manual, very custom-built. It looked something like that. And it was super brittle. Every time they changed the ontology, there were ripple effects that went throughout the entire system. What they really didn't like is that the relational back end of the system forced certain implementation details to go back up into the into the semantic store, into the graph store, and get pushed into their ontology. And nobody liked that. It really started impacting the system. Ultimately, the users kind of got boxed in by this relational back end, and they were not really getting what they wanted. So we approached the customer and said, hey, you have all of this observation data coming in. It's living in MarkLogic. Why don't we try implementing this MarkLogic Esri connector that James and Tim were just talking about? And we did that. Ultimately, what they wound up with was a multi-model database. We have the JSON LD documents in the database. We are semantically indexing those documents so they're able to do Sparkle queries over that data. And now we integrated this MarkLogic Esri connector, and they're accessing the very same data using the Esri feature services. So they wound up with a true multi-model database. To give you a little bit of idea of what was going on in this database underneath the hood, we dynamically generated off of this ontology a series of TDE templates. There are about 600 of those for the object classes. There are another 300 or so of those that came off of the mission-specific classes. These templates update automatically when the ontology changes. So as somebody adds a new attribute, that gets pushed into the Esri feature classes as well, feature services as well, excuse me. They're all pushing into one big, gigantic, denormalized view inside of MarkLogic. There are about 700 columns or so in that view. And we weren't sure at first if we wanted to do that, but that turned out to work very well. Because we are using sparse columns, we only pay for what we use. So at any given time, even though we have defined potentially 700 columns on that view, there are only about 150 or so that actually have data in them. So that really helps cut down on any of this complexity. because we're only using those 150 or so columns. This thing isn't paying attention to me. How do I make this move forward?
It stopped working.
Yeah, it stopped working. All right. James, help. You know, I build this thing with like super complex semantic data, and I can't get PowerPoint to work. I feel better that James can't do it either,
Well, I think
because
it's
he's a
the-
lot smarter than me.
I think it's the computer.
Are you blaming the equipment?
Yes.
That's always a safe bet.
Yeah, it's PowerPoint malfunction. Yeah, it's hung up.
You mean you got through all those demos and you had a computer that does this to you?
Yeah,
You're a brave
yeah,
man.
apparently. Yeah, PowerPoint is completely frozen up. It's not, yeah. So, other option would be to use another machine. You could switch it real quick if you want to keep talking.
I'll let you switch that. I can run it off my phone, but you guys can't see that.
Here, let's just switch real quick. If you want to keep talking.
I am going to run this off my phone. I'm going to get to the right slide. Can you guys see this? So what this says is that our service descriptors are also dynamically generated off of that ontology. And I am going to use this so I can remember what I was going to say. So the service descriptors, there are about 600 of those service descriptors that were based on those static ontology classes. There are about, depending on what we're looking at, there are about 3 layers in the static service classes. There were about maybe 54 or so layers that were in the custom template, the custom mission services. We saw up to about 54. There were a few, there were less in the other ones. So what was interesting about the service descriptors, we had 700 potential columns. About 150 of those actually have data. The customer didn't want to see 150 columns coming back in their service descriptors. They only wanted to see the columns that actually had data for that particular service. So we run as we generate the service descriptors. Are you getting back to my big screen here? All right, woohoo! We're back on the big screen. So we run a big optic query as we generate these service descriptors that will narrow down the number of attributes that we're returning in each service so that we're only returning the ones that actually have data. And that was a real important thing. And as we do with the templates, we automatically generate and update these service descriptors as the ontology changes. I should have mentioned, I'm going to go back 2 slides. No, now I'm going forward. How do I go back on this
Yeah.
thing? Where's my remote?
It doesn't work. It's
Wow.
not hooked up. Just use that.
All right. Man, PowerPoint problems. I can develop all these things, but I can't develop simple things. I got to go backwards, sorry. So back on this slide, the templates. I said we have a lot of templates. The real key thing with this is we very carefully constructed the context part of the templates so that documents that come in will match one and only one template. I would not, to keep your ingest performance good, that is really, really important for this piece. Okay, I said my part there. So the benefits of this, we got rid of the baked-in silos in this architecture. So we're not influencing other parts of the architecture because of the limitations of another part of the architecture. Everything is a MarkLogic. It is a real multi-model database. The other thing, and the customer kind of forgets this, but you get all of the regular kind of bread and butter features of MarkLogic with this thing, all of the HA, enterprise resilience, plain old search, bread and butter search, scalability, security, all of that comes along. This isn't, just limited to this fancy stuff we're doing. They get all of that with a regular document ingest. The ultimate benefit of this is we got rid of that wacko ETL that they had to go through. Everything is just a MarkLogic. Everything is fed out of MarkLogic. There's no complicated extraction piece. Sort of an unexpected thing was this thing that was called service on the fly. This is an example, obviously, with names changed to protect the innocent, are the kinds of queries that they are submitting against this system. Show me a service where the phrase Humpty Dumpty is within 10 words of the phrase, all the king's horses. Kind of a regular query that they might integrate or submit against the system. Show me all objects, this is more of a semantic, actually a very semantic query. Show me all objects of type vehicle that are garaged at buildings of type single family home that have 4 bedrooms. And as an added twist, the fact that the vehicle is garaged somewhere is in a different document than the building being of type single family home, which is in turn in a different document than the fact that it has 4 bedrooms. Okay, this is very difficult, but query to do document-wise, but it is easy to do semantically. Okay, I'm being asked to wrap it up. So I'll just tell you what was happening very quickly. End users had an application that would let them refine these services, these searches. The application would then insert service descriptors and instantly they're live. So there's a new set of capabilities that came out of this. You guys can take a look at that. As you can imagine, these are now very flexible in terms of attribution and the results that they get. And users are finally getting what they want and what they needed to actually fulfill their missions. So I think we are going back to
Very
you.
good.
Yeah.
All right, I'm
Go
going to hand it
ahead,
over
go
to you guys.
Go ahead, go to the next slide. Yeah. So next steps, MarkLogic, you saw ICAP, Tim showed ICAP. We're working on integrating that even further, getting the ArcGIS Pro add-in into the Esri marketplace, working on enhancements to the connector. We want you guys to start using it and give us more feedback on new capabilities that we should be adding, but we're working on time-aware queries, additional bounding query constraints that we can add, and improve the way it can be deployed. So with that, we're going to finish it up with questions.
Probably have time for a couple quick questions, and we can always maybe grab you guys outside
Yeah,
afterwards
yeah,
if you
yeah.
don't mind. Anybody have a question? So we're all shy? You got to be kidding me.
Quick question on the possibility of large data sets such as LiDAR. Is that still applicable to, let's say, like full motion video with LiDAR attachments? Can that still be seen live?
So, I mean, I think the full motion video, I think probably on the Esri tooling side is probably it'd be best to answer that.
Yeah, tell you what, that's a little bit of a tricky answer. I'd be happy to talk more offline because it's a long answer.
Yeah.
Short run is yes. Long answer is it depends on what you're really trying to get out of it. And I want to make sure I'm being very accurate to that.
Any other questions? Sure.
I just have a question about clarification. What is a service descriptor? Is that specific to Esri? Is it a configuration document or?
No, it's something that we created as part of the Esri connector. It's something that's specific to that tool. So it allows you to declaratively say like the name of the service and what layers are in those services and what data should be exposed in each one of those layers.
And just curious, what were you using to monitor the directory that you dragged the sitrep data into?
That is NiFi was running. So it's a NiFi process that's running, loading the data and running it through NetOwl.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Well, you were that
It's
thorough.
before lunch. Everybody wants to go eat.
Everyone's
Yeah.
hungry. So, thank you all very much. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. And
Thank you.
enjoy the rest of MarkLogic World.